France is the worst of the colonizers from all objective assessments. Of course, Samora Moises Machel said it is wrong to categorize slave makers as one being better than the other. But permit me to say that they were the worst. A breed of young men and women begin rising. They rise in Guinea-Conakry. And the first thing they do is they say, we abolish all the agreements that exist between us and France. They rise in Burkina Faso and they say the same thing. They rise in Mali and they say the same thing. They rise in Niger, which has been providing you with uranium. Now you can't take it. I think they cannot take it because they are losing food which has been inside of their mouth. And they do not know how to behave. As somebody once said, without Africa, there is no France.
Tinubu ya hito ya yi maƙyan Najeriya bayani fassara bisa kai ga kuɗin da ya amso Faransa. In bai gayi ba akwai ranar ƙin dillanci sosai kuwa. Tunda shi Allah.
Tinubu should come forward and explain to Nigerians the funds he received from France. If he fails to do so, the truth will eventually come to light. God will reveal it. Despite the attack on us, we have not taken money from anyone, so no one can accuse us of corruption. I've been around the corridors of power for 13 years, and no one can claim that I've ever accepted bribes.
Su sun ka zo tunda sun ga ta sama ne sojan Chad ke kai ma yan Boko Hari sai sun ka ba su makamai masu sabke jirgi.
Reports indicate that the Chadian forces have attacked Boko Haram fighters using the airspace, prompting the French to equip the terrorists with anti-aircraft guns in retaliation. This happened in October this year. According to information we gathered from those we arrested, there is a plan involving France and the Nigerian government to allow other terror groups such as ISWAP and Lakurawa to establish a base in the Gaba area of Sokoto State. This move is said to facilitate operations across the northwestern states, including Zamfara and Kebbi, with the full knowledge of the Nigerian government.
Dajin nan ana son a maida shi tsibiri ne na ƴan ta'adda waɗanda aka ce ma Lakurawa.
Even when you regained your freedom, really you did not regain it. Your master still had control over you. And laws such as that were laws which were designed to ensure that you continue slavery. And the reason was this. It is not everybody who agreed to the abolition of slavery. So that even when slave trade had been abolished, slavery still continued. The only thing that stopped is that you could no longer legitimately sell human beings as commodities. But slavery remained, and as we speak, remains now. So in many of those parts of the world, you still had enslavers who could come for you. You are free, but they can come for you and take you. And you work in their farms, and they deal with you as they deem fit. Sometimes the only thing they gave you was food. And the Portuguese were terrible at this. The Spaniards were terrible at this. The English pretended, of course, after the abolition that they were no longer doing this. But some of their remnants continue to behave in this way, particularly in the islands. Because in the islands, they did not have as much control as they had in the metropole in England or in the larger part of the United States. So it's true that all manner of laws were enacted. In the United States, we have the Dred Scott Law. All these laws were being passed because you said slavery and slave trade had stopped, but there are people who are continuing with it. And if they are continuing with it and they are like it, how do you know? And you are dealing with slaves who have nothing. They do not know where to go. They can't go to their homes in Africa where they came from. They don't have guns. They don't have houses. They don't have means. Sometimes some of them preferred even to go back to their masters, because at least under those masters, they had food on the table. Outside, it was wild, and they did not know what to happen. And they were also slave hunters. people who continued to hunt people who had free, and they hunted and brought them down to the slave camps. Haiti is a very sad state, the first black African country to regain independence, and we know the great Haitian independence fighter, Toussaint de Louverture. That was the man who defeated Napoleon, and he was never forgiven for that. When he defeated Napoleon, the French never forgave him, and of course they were granted independence in 1890s, and it was black dominated. And remember, we don't say much about this. If you look at the map of Haiti, you have the Dominican Republic, Santo Domingo, which was then the white population was moved to Santo Domingo, and Port-au-Prince, which is the capital of Haiti, became the part of the capital of Haiti, which was completely dominated by black. Many of them from Benin, what is now Benin, which used to be called Dahomey. And you will discover that they actually retained most of their culture. But the French have ensured, and the French swore that Haiti will never know peace. That they humiliated us by defeating Napoleon, they will never know peace. So at independence, Toussaint Louverture signed that they would be paying money to the French as compensation. I think it was, if it is not him, but I think the Ceylan, one of them signed, and Haiti continued to pay reparation. You remember, I mean, somebody has enslaved you. Somebody has colonized you, and when they are leaving, they say you owe them. And it is as if there was a conspiracy amongst the white powers in that part of the world, because when the French left, there was a period in 1905, I think, for a few years, when the Americans actually occupied Haiti and dominated Haiti. If they had wanted Haiti to prosper, they would have ensured that it did. But they did not. And after that, of course, we know how they presided over the occupation of Haiti by some of the most abusive leaders the world have ever known, Jean-Claude Duvalier, called Papa Doc, who used a combination of voodoo and violence to dominate Haiti. And I remember as a young man, we used to hear about Jean-Claude Duvalier, Papa Doc. And after that, of course, we had the son, Baby Doc, who dominated Haiti. And it was all violence, it was all voodoo, and Haiti remained poor and impoverished. So that when in the late 1980s and early 1990s, there was a movement now to try and stabilize Haiti. And there came a man who was a Catholic priest, Jean-Baptiste Aristide, who tried to change Haiti, to try to create order in Haiti. He was removed. Jean-Baptiste Aristide was removed, and then later he was brought back, and I think at time, I think he even came to and lived in South Africa, Jean-Baptiste Aristide, and he went back, and Europe and America, France and America have ensured that Haiti is the way it is. Now Haiti is a land of gangs, everybody occupying their own little corner. It is, if you talk of a failed nation, if you talk of an ungovernable nation, Haiti is. And that is on the doorsteps of a country that claimed that is the strongest country on earth. One would have assumed that if there was ever a case of a country that needed the intervention of the world through the UN, to simply go there and say that this is a US mandated administration and we administer Haiti for the next 25 years, when it is stabilized, then we will give it back to the people. I give you this, the history and what is contemporary, that it may be understood that slavery and colonization and its impact are things that are with us. They are not things that we read in history books. You open any major television, you'll see what is happening in Haiti now. Gangs in Port-au-Prince with AK-47s and other military-grade equipment and machetes in the streets. When you sleep in Port-au-Prince, one eye must be open, courtesy of the legacy of slavery, and of course, colonization, and of course, neo-colonization, and of course, the vow that was made by the French, Haiti will never know peace. The French are a unique people. Unique in the sense that they claim that France is the mother of modern day revolution, with the French Revolution in 18th century. Liberté, fraternité. That was France during the revolution, and that they exported this revolution to the world. Yet somehow, France is the worst of the colonizers from all objective assessments. Of course, Samora Moises Machel said it is wrong to categorize slave makers as one being better than the other. But permit me to say that they were the worst. Number one, unlike the British, who simply were interested in your resources and therefore engaged in what was called direct rule, the French wanted to assimilate you. So their policy was assimilation. They came to the colonies and they wanted to convert you into Frenchmen and French women. And in school parades in the colonized parts of the world by the French, like Senegal, like Mali, like Burkina Faso, which was then Upper Volta, like Togo and Benin and Suriname. During the parade in the morning, pupils used to recite our ancestors, the Gauls. A black pupil saying that their ancestors were the Gauls. They wanted you to speak French. And once they had picked a few of you and took them to the Sorbonne, you had to be a total Frenchman or a total Frenchwoman. They came to different parts of the world and they created what they call the Petit Paris. Abidjan is Petit Paris, the small Paris. And their colonies were actually called overseas territories, les territoires d'outre-mer. They called them overseas territories, being administered from the metropole. The French never intended to leave. They never intended to leave Suriname. They never intended to leave Vietnam. They never intended to leave Senegal or Mali or Guinea-Conakry. And they were vicious. They punished you. They humiliated you. They did not want you to speak your language. I do not know why they were that harsh. Perhaps it's because of their history. Remember, this is a country that had kings. This is a country that had Marie Antoinette. This is a country that had King Louis XVI, and there was a time, it is King Louis XIV, who at one time when he was asked, and what is the state? I think that is that experience. King Louis XIV, when they were controlling France, he was asked, and what is the state? He said, l'État, c'est moi. I am the state. And when later King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette came, the French were humiliated. When the people asked where we want bread, they say, why don't they eat cake? And I think that history, that pain, when they created the revolution, I think in 1789, and they created the revolution, France was humiliated during the war by the Germans, and when therefore they became colonialists, they were visiting this pain upon the world. And as early as 1958, as recently as 1958, when they recalled Charles de Gaulle to come and take over power in 1958, remember when Charles de Gaulle came, This was a military general. This is the height of decolonization. He used military force in order to retain the French colonies. And the colonies is what made France what is. So that the France that you see now is a France that is built on the back of those colonies. They were harsh because their very survival depended on these colonies. And their harshness can be seen when on the eve of independence in African countries, they signed the pact for the continuation of colonization. The yes-no vote for French colonies to decide whether after so-called independence they would retain connection and connectivity with Paris. They gave everybody the opportunity to vote yes or no, but they did not want you to vote no. So that when Guinea voted no under Ahmed Sékou Touré, when they were leaving, they destroyed everything that was capable of being destroyed. Modibo Keïta, in what was then the French Sudan, now Mali, they destroyed everything. Algeria, the pogrom in Algeria, when they were leaving, then led by Ahmed Ben Bella, they destroyed everything. The other countries, they continue to control. As we speak, the currencies of all former French colonies are still printed in France, CFA franc. Their cruelty, I think, comes out of a big psychological burden, which they visit, transfer of aggression. It is painful. You can see even as we speak during the coup d'etats in Africa, the arrogance. You tell a country which is equal in international law that we have accredited our ambassador, we do not care. France, the home of revolution, the home of coup d'etats at one time, can not recognize a revolution when it's taking place, and they say, accept our ambassador. We don't accept the revolution. That is France for you. Arrogance. The most arrogant of the colonial powers. You know, the history of France is the history of how the arrogance fall. If you allow me, the school bully who takes lunch from every little boy and little girl thinks that he is invincible. Then one day, the little boy says, today you are not taking my lunch. And what the little boy does is to hit you when you did not expect. And you find yourself on the ground and everybody is laughing at you. France did not see what is happening in West Africa coming. So they find themselves at a time when they are very weak economically, when at home the population of immigrants is growing bigger and bigger. You go to cities such as Marseille, you find Algerians, you find Moroccans, you find Senegalese, you find Guineans, you find Burkinabe, and things are not happening as they used to be. Then, in the former colonies that you thought you are controlling, a breed of young men and women begin rising. They rise in Guinea-Conakry, and the first thing they do is they say, we abolish all the agreements that exist between us and France. They rise in Burkina Faso and they say the same thing. They rise in Mali and they say the same thing. They rise in Niger, which has been providing you with uranium. Now you can't take it. I think they cannot take it because they are losing food which has been inside of their mouth, and they do not know how to behave. As somebody once said, without Africa, there is no France. Without our former colonies, give France only 20 years, and it will be one of the poorest nations in the continent of Europe. And that is going to happen. And they are resisting because for them this is life and death. But the stars, which I can now perfectly read, are telling me that their goose is cooked, and very well cooked.